Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus remains a huge influence on modern society even though he lived over 2,000 years ago. He has a modern city, Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States, named after him, and his statues stand in several major cities around the world, including Paris and Vienna. The Society of the Cincinnati, founded in 1783, is a fraternity that commemorates the American Revolution and has George Washington, the first U.S. president, amongst its earliest members. It carries the name of Cincinnatus because its members embrace the ideals of Cincinnatus, especially in political and military leadership. When resigning from the office of the Prime Minister in the UK in September 2022, Boris Johnson stated that, quote, "Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plow," end of quote. So, who exactly was Cincinnatus and why has he remained an inspiration to many over 2,000 years after he lived? I welcome you to my YouTube channel where I explore ancient texts, and ancient texts here I mean texts that have been around for thousands of years. At the moment, I'm going through From the Founding of the City by Titus Livius or Livy. This is a collection of books that was written slightly over 2,000 years ago. It covers the history of Rome from the founding of the city by Romulus, which happened around 730 BCE, to the time when Augustus was emperor, which was close to 0 AD. If you've not subscribed, subscribe so that you do not miss any of the videos I upload. Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus served as an outstanding soldier, consul, and dictator in ancient Rome. He came from the Quintian patrician family. The first time Livy mentions Cincinnatus is when he tells us about his son Caeso. Caeso finds himself in trouble with the tribunes of the people that eventually forces him to escape into exile. Caeso's decision to go into exile leads to his father, Cincinnatus, losing all his property and falling into poverty. But what exactly did Caeso do? Caeso led a gang of young patricians using threats of violence to block the plebeians from coming to the assembly to vote on the Terentilian Law, a law that was proposed by Gaius Terentilius Harsa, a tribune of the people, to check the powers of the consuls. The tribunes of the people, in particular Aulus Viginius, impeached Caeso as part of a strategy to weaken the opposition to their objective of getting the law passed. The tribunes of the people, among other things, falsely accused Caeso of murdering someone. When these charges were brought before the assembly, calls for his arrest were made. However, after long consultation between the tribunes, consuls, and the Senate, it was agreed that he post a bail of 30,000 asses while awaiting trial. He was let go, but the same evening he escaped and went to stay in the land of the Etruscans. On the appointed day of trial, Cincinnatus was forced to sell much of his assets to settle the bail, as the son failed to show up to face his accusers. Livy tells us that due to the level of poverty Cincinnatus sank into as a result, he moved across the Tiber River and lived in a simple hut. Not long after the Caeso incident, slaves in the city under the leadership of one Appius Herdonius revolted. They took the control of the capital and the citadel. While the plebeians and the patricians quarreled over whether it was indeed true that the slaves had revolted or it was an act orchestrated by the patrician to divert the attention of the plebeians, Lucius Mamilius, the dictator of the neighboring town of Tusculum, sent an army to help Romans crush the slave revolt. During the assault on the capital and the citadel, Publius Valerius Publicola, one of the reigning consuls, is killed. Once the revolt is crushed, Romans have to elect someone to replace him as consul. Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus was elected. This was in the year 460 BCE. Cincinnatus immediately took a firm stand against the demands of the plebeians, especially regarding the proposed Terentilian Law, the same law that led to his son being charged with murder. Livy writes, "When he entered on his magistracy, he continually delivered harangues from the tribunal in which he censured the Senate as energetically as he put down the plebs. It was, he said, through the apathy of that order that the tribunes of the people, now perpetually in office, acted as kings in their speeches and accusations, as though they were living not in the Commonwealth of Rome, but in some wretched, ill-regulated family." Livy states that his long and aggressive speeches made many, especially among the patricians, to feel that under his leadership the state had been re-established. The tribunes of the people, however, saw him as a major threat and often challenged his policies, including decisions to go to war. When the conflict with the tribunes of the people became too much, a consultation was held and an agreement was reached. It was agreed that the Terentilian Law was not to be discussed for at least a year. Also, the consuls were not to launch any military campaign in that period. Lastly, the consuls and the tribunes in office when the agreement was signed were not to be re-elected. Most likely this last clause was targeted at Cincinnatus. The consuls kept their side of the bargain, but the tribunes did not. The tribunes of the people in office when the agreement was signed were re-elected amidst protests from the consuls and the wider patrician class. As a response to this disregard of the agreement by the tribunes, the Senate decided to re-elect Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus as consul. But to say Cincinnatus disliked the idea is an understatement. Livy writes, "Nothing during the whole year roused the indignation of the consul more than this proceeding of the senators." This is what he told the Senate as he declined the offer. "Can I be surprised, conscript fathers, if your authority has little weight with the plebeians? You yourselves are weakening it, because, forsooth, they have disregarded the senatorial decree forbidding a magistrate continuance in office. You yourself wish it to be disregarded, that you may not be behind the populace in headstrong thoughtlessness, as though to possess more power in the state was to show more levity and lawlessness." He retired, perhaps believing that was the last time he held public office. However, his better days as a leader of Rome were ahead of him. He moved with his wife Rasilia to his 4-acre farm on the other side of the Tiber and became busy plowing, growing crops, and keeping animals. After 2 years of his retirement, Rome was facing an unexpected existential threat. The consuls in power were Lucius Minucius and Gaius Terentilius. The Aquae violated a treaty signed earlier and attacked the allies of Rome, in particular Tusculum. Meanwhile, an alliance of the Sabines attacked Rome. Both consuls led armies to defend the city from this attack. Livy tells us that both were not equally successful in their campaign. Livy writes, "Nautius led one of them against the Sabines, formed an entrenched camp, sent out, generally at night, small bodies who created such destructions in the Sabines territory that the Roman borders appeared in comparison almost untouched by war. Minucius was not so fortunate, nor did he conduct the campaign with the same energy. After taking up an entrenched position not far from the enemy, he remained timidly within his camp, though he had not suffered any important defeat. As usual, the enemy were emboldened by the lack of courage on the other side. They made night attack on his camp, but as they gained little by direct assault, they proceeded the following day to invest it. Before all the exits were closed by the circumvallation, 5 mounted men got through the enemy's outpost, brought to Rome the news that the consul and his army were blockaded. This turn of events was not expected. When the news reached Rome, it created massive panic as if it was the city that had been put under siege. The Senate initially summoned Nautius to abandon his own campaign to come and save Minucius and his army. But it quickly became clear that would make the city even more vulnerable. The Senate decided it was time to appoint a dictator. Rome appointed a dictator whenever there was a major crisis that needed a leader to make decisions without having to refer to other institutions such as the Senate and the tribunes. Looking around, only Cincinnatus seemed to have heard what was needed. He was unanimously elected dictator without his knowledge. While all this was happening, he was busy on his land preparing for the planting season. Some senators were sent to go talk to him and let him know of the new developments. Livy writes, "The one hope of Rome, Cincinnatus, used to cultivate a 4-acre field on the other side of the Tiber, just opposite the place where the dockyard and arsenal are now situated. It bears the name of the Quintian Meadows. There he was found by the deputation from the Senate either digging out a ditch or plowing, at all events, as it was generally agreed, intent on his husbandry. After mutual salutations, he was requested to put on his toga that he might hear the mandate of the Senate. They expressed the hope that it might turn out well for him and for the state. He asked them in surprise if all was well, and bade his wife Rasilia bring him his toga quickly from the cottage. Wiping off the dust and perspiration, he put it on and came forward, on which the deputation saluted him as dictator and congratulated him, invited him to the city, and explained the state of apprehension in which the army were. He was led to a vessel that took him to the other side of the river, where he found a huge crowd of people waiting for him. 3 of his sons were among those who had been waiting for him. Also, the majority of the Senate was present. Livy tells us a huge crowd escorted him to his official house. led by a group of lictors. However, not everyone in the city was happy to see Cincinnatus come back as a dictator. Livy writes, there was also an enormous gathering of the plebeians, but they were by no means so pleased to see Cincinnatus. They regarded the power with which he was invested as excessive, and the man himself more dangerous than his power. The following morning, Cincinnatus appointed Lucius Tarquitius as his master of the horse, and then suspended all public and private business. He ordered all shops closed. With that done, he ordered all those who were of military age to appear before him fully armed. Each was required to come with 5 days' provisions. Those who were beyond the age of military service were required to help the younger men prepare for their now imminent mission, including cooking the food they would carry. When all was ready, the army under the leadership of the dictator started to march towards Algidus, where Minucius and his army were held. They reached Algidus at midnight. Livy writes, the dictator, after riding round and scouted out as well as he could in the night the position and shape of the camp, he commanded the military tribunes to give orders for the baggage to be collected together and the soldiers with their arms and ballistas to resume their places in the ranks. His orders were carried out. Then, keeping the formation in which they had marched, the whole army in one long column surrounded the enemy's lines. At a given signal, all were ordered to raise a shout. After raising the shout, each man was to dig a trench in front of him and fix his palisade. As soon as the order reached the men, the signal followed. The men obeyed the order, and the shout rolled round the enemy's line over them into the consul's camp. In one, it created panic; in the other, rejoicing. The Romans recognized their fellow citizens' shout and congratulated one another on help being at hand. They even made sorties from their post against the enemy and so increased their alarm. The consuls fought the Aquae with his men from inside, while the dictator attacked them from outside. The battle went on throughout the night. By morning, a significant number of the Aquae soldiers had been killed and they were ready to surrender. Their leaders, including one Crocius Cloelius, were brought before the dictator in chains. Cincinnatus was, however, not interested in massacring men who had surrendered. Livy writes, he told the Aquae he did not require their blood. They were at liberty to depart, but as an open admission of the defeat and subjugation of their nation, they will have to pass under the yoke. This was made of 3 spears, 2 fixed upright in the ground, and the third tied to them across the top. Under this yoke, the dictator sent the Aquae. So after performing the symbolism of being defeated, the Aquae were let go without carrying anything except the shirts on their bodies. Cincinnatus gave everything that was found in their camp to his own soldiers. He did not allow Minucius soldiers to take a share. He told them, you soldiers will go without your share of the spoil, for you all but fell a spoil yourself to the enemy from whom it was taken. And you, Lucius Minucius, will command these legions as a staff officer until you begin to show the spirit of a consul. Minucius resigned as a consul and allowed the dictator to command his army. With the Aquae defeated, Cincinnatus led the army back to Rome, where he was given an heroic welcome. He had only one other matter to oversee, and that was the prosecution of Marcus Volscius Fictor, the man who had falsely accused his son Caeso of murdering his brother. Livy writes, it had become known from many sources that after the brother of Volscius first became ill, he had not only never been seen in public, but had not even left his bed. And his death was due to an illness of many months' standing. On the date at which the witness fixed the crime, Caeso was not seen in Rome, whilst those who had served with him declared that he had constantly been in his place in the ranks with them and had not had leave of absence. Volscius was condemned and he went into exile. Cincinnatus resigned after 16 days of reigning as dictator, even though he had been appointed to rule for 6 months. His 3 sons, Titus, Lucius, and Quintus, were later elected as consuls. Only Caeso never held a high public office in Rome. It is for coming from his farm at Mount Vernon to fight for the independence of the US and resigning after 2 terms in office that George Washington came to be compared to Cincinnatus. The fraternity of Cincinnatus was created by soldiers who fought alongside George Washington. By claiming, like Cincinnatus, I'm returning to my plow, Boris Johnson was indicating he had achieved his goal and was ready to go into private life without staying in office more than it was necessary. Over the years, students of Cincinnatus have considered it prudent and admirable to be in a political office, not more than it is necessary. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. That will help this channel grow. See you in the next video.